Hi, I want to talk about trauma, what it is, and how it contributes to your clients presenting problems. Here's a partial list of presenting problems that can either be caused by trauma or made worse by trauma. Disruptive behaviors, poor frustration tolerance, depression, withdrawal, don't care anymore, apathy, anxiety, worry, trouble concentrating or staying focused, fighting, truancy, substance abuse, crime, suicide. It turns out that just about any presenting problem can be either caused or made worse by trauma, with the exception of the neurological-based disorders such as learning disabilities, autism spectrum, etc. But even then, there can be a trauma overlay that makes things worse than they have to be. So this isn't only about PTSD, it's really about the types of problems that can occur across diagnoses. Trauma generally has a piece of the action. So what is trauma? For this course, we're going to use a really broad definition. We'll start out with, we're going to call it something bad that happens that isn't processed effectively. And what makes something traumatic? Well, let's start out with the DSM-3 in 1980, when the psychiatrists discovered trauma. That's the first time PTSD was listed. And in the DSM-3, trauma was described as a horrific event beyond the scope of normal human experience. Well, obviously things have gotten a lot worse since then, because we know that even those criterion A major traumatic events are not beyond the scope of normal human experience. Let's take our best protected population. By the way, I'll be talking a lot about children, because whether you're working with children or adults, most of your clients started out that way, and their experience as children is going to be relevant to their treatment from a trauma therapy perspective. So let's take our best protected population of children. Where do you find them? I would argue in college. How do you get to college? You have a soccer mom. You know, you have someone who gets you to soccer or gymnastics or art or tutoring or whatever's going to help you develop your potential. Someone who knows who your friends are and where you are. Someone who makes sure you do your homework. I know there are other ways of getting to college too, but for the most part, the kids who get as far as college have been generally well cared for, well protected, at least relatively speaking. So Vrana and Lauterbach did a study with a large class of intro psych students, so kids about 18, 19 years old. And nice thing about doing a study with college students is that they all want to participate in the study because they want the extra 2 points on their grade. They don't want to have to write the paper. So you get what's called a representative sample. They found that 84% of their students had had at least one criterion A major traumatic event by the time they were done being children. And of course, we don't stop having traumas just because we turn 18. And many of their students had more than one event. If you go to our least protected populations, where do we find them? Certain low rent, high crime neighborhoods, residential treatment, incarceration, right? So in those populations, you find that the rate of incidence of traumatic events is closer to 100%, and a much larger percentage of those people have multiple events or even chronic exposure. So this is not beyond the scope of normal human experience. Just about everybody has it, no matter where you grow up. What's the difference between trauma and loss? There are two main differences. One is that with loss, you tend not to get that hyperarousal symptom, that heightened startle response, the jumpiness, that you often, not always, but often get with trauma. The other is that you get more post-traumatic stress symptoms from loss than you do from other kinds of trauma. And several recent studies have found this. And, it makes sense if you think of somebody who's just lost a loved one or been through a difficult breakup. Aren't they having intrusive thoughts all the time and very upset and, angry? Yeah. So the bottom line is that trauma and loss are mostly about the same. And so for our purposes, it's all trauma because the impact is the same and the treatment is about the same too. Of course, every specific loss and every type of trauma has a few little differences, but they're much more the same than different. Now, not every upsetting event becomes traumatic. What makes something traumatic? Largely how hard it hits. And so we look at how close to home it is. Did it happen to you? Were you there to see it? Or is it just something you heard about, right? Or, if it happened to you or somebody you care about, that's going to hit harder than if it's somebody you know. And that's going to hit harder than if it's somebody you don't know. So, of course, the closer to home it is in these ways, the harder it's going to hit. We also want to look at the aftermath because trauma is not only what happens in a moment, it's how it plays out. Let's say you've got a bomb this size, it makes a crater over here. You've got another bomb exactly the same over here, it makes a crater exactly the same, but on the edge of this crater, there's some buildings. That trauma is worse because the aftermath was worse. And so, when we look at what happened to somebody, it's not only what happened in the moment, but also how many buildings fell into the crater, right? So if a child's father dies and then their mother becomes depressed or starts to drink, then that's a further impact, right? I worked in Kauai, one of the smaller Hawaiian islands, the year after there'd been a major hurricane there. And, the hurricane, you probably don't remember that particular hurricane, but you've seen the pictures on TV. The trees are down, the phone poles are down, the windows are blowing out, there's tarps where the roofs used to be, Well, some parents who had the means, they looked around at the wreckage and they said, we're not going to put our kids through any more of this. And they pulled up and they moved and they started a new life somewhere else. Those children did worse than the children who stayed. The children who stayed, okay, they had to wear shoes for a little while, because there's all this stuff over on the ground, but they still had their friends, they still had their neighborhood, they still had their school. The kids who left, all they had was their parents and their teddy bear. So they lost a lot more. So this is why when we're figuring out what happened to somebody, it's not only what happened in the moment, but also how it played out. And when we're there on the spot, we try to guide people to minimize the number of buildings that fall into that crater, right? Like when we're talking with parents who are divorcing, we'll say, look, you're divorcing, but your kids aren't. So how can we keep as many things as possible the same for the kids? Can they stay in the same house? Can they maintain relationships with both parents? Can they keep on going to the same school, right? Let's try to minimize the impact. So a quick and dirty definition of trauma is really, it's the difference between I hate this, but I can handle it, versus I hate this and it's too much, I can't handle it. That second is trauma. It's too much, so there's often going to be a sense of powerlessness or helplessness. Now, when I talk to my clients about their trauma memories, some of them, especially some of the teenage boys, will kind of brush it off. They'll say, yeah, it's all good. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Now, when I hear somebody say that, the first thing I'm thinking is denial. But it could be true. We've all had things happen to us that we didn't like. And yet we say, well, look at me now. Part of who I am in a good way is because I went through that. So when what doesn't kill you does make you stronger, how does that work? I think Kubler-Ross had a pretty good model for how you get from wounded to stronger than before. Dr. Kubler-Ross spent time with people who had lost loved ones. And what she observed was initially, most of them were kind of messed up after a major loss. That's expected. Some of them stayed messed up, whereas others came out even stronger than before. And for those who did come out stronger, she observed a pattern of things they went through that she called stages of grief processing. So I'm gonna, I do work a lot with children, and so I tend to use a lot of food metaphors and movie metaphors. We'll start with food. So the food version of Kubler-Ross's model goes something like this. Let's say something this bad happened. My dog died, it hurts me this much. Well, one of these days I'm going to take a bite out of that. And the first bite, according to Kubler-Ross's model, denial. Can't believe she's dead. I'm going to come home, open the door, she's going to bark, wag her tail, just like always. The next bite, maybe a few minutes later, maybe a week later, when I get around to it, anger. I'm mad. That car driver who ran her down, I hate that person. I hate myself. I shouldn't have let her run outside. Then, sadness. I miss her. And of course, it's not in perfect order, and it's not just one bite at each stage. You get the idea. Then, perspective. Maybe forgiveness, acceptance, humor. All right. I'm sorry she's dead. I miss her. I'm glad I let her run outside. She loved to run outside. She was a happy dog. She had a lot of good years. If this was just a recovery model, I'm okay now. I'm back on my feet. But this is a growth model. It's a make you stronger model. The final phase Kubler-Ross observed among people who did come out stronger than before. They found a healthy, constructive way to maintain the relationship with the lost person or dog. So how do you maintain a healthy relationship with a dead person? It sounds a little weird only for a moment until we think about what we actually do. No big deal. I visit his grave. I talk to her at night. I do something he taught me how to do. I carry on her work. I tell my children stories about him. I wear her jacket. I carry him in my heart, right? There are so many ways that we do maintain this relationship in a way that makes us more. Turns out that trauma processing follows about the same track. All right, early on, there might be a phase of fear. The rest of it goes through about the same until you get to that final step. You're not necessarily going to make a healthy relationship with the stranger who attacked you or the tree that fell on your car or whatever it is. But the essence of that final phase is about the same. It's about making more of yourself from what happened to you. It could be as simple as, now I know how strong I am. Or maybe now I have more compassion for other people who have been through experiences like that. Or even, I'm going to take what happened to me and do some good in the world because of that. So when what doesn't kill you does make you stronger, this is one way of understanding it. we take the bites out, we chew them. They don't all taste good, but we chew them up, digest it, becomes part of our nutrition, something we grow from, right? And of course, as you're taking the bites out, the part that hurts gets smaller and smaller. What the brain scientists are saying about this is that before you digest that memory, it's just a jumble of fragments, images from what happened, thoughts, emotions, physical sensations. And as you go through what I'm calling the digesting process, you're taking those fragments, you're organizing them into a coherent narrative, into a story, bringing your psychological resources to bear on it, whether that's processing the emotions, making sense out of it in different ways, and integrating it with the rest of your stories, with your history, where it becomes part of long-term memory, part of the past, something you've grown from that doesn't hurt you anymore. So that's the ideal. You're in a trauma training because we understand that sometimes what doesn't kill you doesn't make you stronger. Sometimes it messes you up. So how does that work? What if the bad thing that happens is this bad? Well, that's so big, I don't even know where to start taking a bite out of that. And also, this is too much. I can't stand it. I know what to do. I'll push it out of the way. I'll put up a wall. It's there. I'm here. And now I can get through the day. Your clients will tell you about this. They'll say things like, no, that doesn't bother me. I keep it out of my mind. I try to forget about it. And that works. That's why people do it, right? It's an effective, quick relief strategy. But here's where the food metaphor breaks down. If you eat something that's bad for you, you get rid of it. If you have an experience that's bad for you, you may try to get rid of it, but it stays fresh behind that wall for a week, a year, 50 years. You ask somebody 50 years later, bring that memory to mind, what do you get? And they'll say things like, wow, it's so vivid, it's like yesterday, or I'm there. It stays fresh. And all those fragments are waiting for a chance to come on out, get digested, come through the system, become part of the past. Meanwhile, those fragments piled up behind the wall there, they're like a wound or a sore spot. And any little thing that comes along that happens to be a reminder in some way that hits the sore spot, you know what happens when something hits a sore spot? It hurts a lot more than it probably should. So then it can feel like this. For example, I'm thinking of an 11-year-old boy who has a lot of stuff behind his wall from all those times that his father told him what was wrong with him, whipped him with the belt. So what's behind his wall? Of course, there's the images from memories from what happened. People learn from experience, right? What did he learn about himself from those experiences? Things like, I'm not safe, I can't protect myself, I'm weak, I'm helpless. What kinds of emotions might be stuck back there? Things like anger, fear, shame. So, he's walking down the hall in school. Somebody bumps him by accident. Well, getting irritated, getting bumped in the hallway is actually only this irritating. It's something, but it hits the sore spot. And now he's like this. I'm being attacked. And I'm weak and helpless and scared. And this is too much. I can't stand it. I got to get rid of it quick. I know what to do. If I fill up with anger and do something aggressive, I can get rid of this weak, helpless stuff. Well, a teacher happened to be walking by, saw the whole thing, drags him to the office, says, he just popped somebody in the face for nothing. The boy says, no, self-defense. He's not lying. For him, that was his experience. Right? So this is the problem. You know, you push it behind the wall, you get the quick relief, but then you're walking around with a sore spot. And any little thing that happens to hit the sore spot can feel like a big thing. And if you think about your clients who may be generally competent, but in certain areas or situations has an overreaction, this is one way of understanding that, whether the overreaction is anger or shame or anxiety or discouragement or whatever it is. Another problem with this push it behind the wall system is that when the sore spot reaction happens and this stuff does come out, it hasn't been integrated, so you can't negotiate with it. It has a lot of power. For example, think of the rape victims you've known who might say it like this. Look, I know in my head, I didn't deserve it, I'm not a bad person, but sometimes I can't help but feeling. In other words, when this stuff from behind the wall spills out, I can't help but feeling dirty, ashamed, etc. So we have two tracks here. One track, you digest it over time, grow from it, become stronger, it becomes part of the past. The other track is the push it behind the wall track. What determines which way somebody goes? Well, first of all, how bad the event is, how hard it hits, right? But there are other things too. What messages is the person getting from the people around them? For example, children want to be normal, they want to be accepted, they want to be part of the crowd, and they may have learned that if you show your pain, other kids get nervous and reject you. So kids may be cautious about that. And even at home, it's not just the bad kids who keep secrets from their parents. Good kids do too. They don't want to be a burden. And if a parent says, don't talk about that, honey, it'll only make you upset, which is a caring thing to say, the message might be, wow, even my parent can't handle this. It must be really bad. I better just keep it back there behind the wall. Right? Then there's temperament. We know that people are just wired differently. For example, if you stick the same pin into 3 different people's arms, one person's going to hurt this much, one this much, and one like this. People are just different. If you have 3 different 5-year-olds waiting after an event for their father to pick them up, and their father forgot, and so he's an hour late, one of those kids is going to be so busy looking at the ants walking on the sidewalk that they're not even going to realize that they're waiting. Another one is going to be furious, and 5 minutes after the father comes, the anger blows over and it's forgotten. The third one might be busy catastrophizing for that entire hour. Oh, I know why my father's not here. My parents probably got dead in a car accident. I'm an orphan now. And 20 years later, when you're getting a list of the worst things that ever happened, that event is going to be on the list because they experienced it in a very intense way. So how people experience an event subjectively is going to also be part of how hard it hits. All right, so let's say that something this bad happens. No big deal. I ought to be able to take care of that in just 2 or 3 quick bites. And I'm just getting ready to take the first bite when another one comes along. Oh, and another, and a few more, until the pile is so big, say, it's too much. I'm just going to push it behind the wall with yesterday's pile. So I'm not talking now about major trauma or major loss. I'm talking about minor events, any single incident of which would be upsetting but no big deal, but could have this cumulative effect. So what kinds of things come to mind that would be in this category, not of major traumas, but that could have a cumulative effect of creating a sore spot? Here are some examples. Bullying, emotional abuse, neglect, disability, if it's not managed very well, could lead to repeated frustrations. Discrimination, right? What if you're the wrong color or gender identity or body type or religion or social class or whatever it is, and you're subject to repeated disrespects or hardships or discrimination? That can have a cumulative effect as well. What else? Chronic medical conditions or chronic pain, learning disability without special help, right? There are so many things that are not so dramatic at any one moment, but that can really be that repeated wound that has a cumulative effect. What people sometimes call family dysfunction, whether that's failure of attunement or other things like that, that can really, really have impact on people. So we just expanded our definition of trauma for the purposes of this class. If it's been pushed behind the wall and makes a sore spot, we're going to count it because it has clinical impact and because we're going to treat it the same way, whatever the DSM calls it. All right? Oh yeah, attachment status is another important factor. We know that people with secure attachment style have better coping skills, better affect tolerance, better social support to help them cope with things, right? And so when you have a 6-year-old who with secure attachment, who is facing something this bad, they're more likely to say, oh, I don't like this, but I can handle it because I have the skills and I have the social support. Whereas somebody with compromised attachment status is more likely at this moment to say, uh-oh, negative emotion, danger, danger, danger. This could be overwhelming. I better get rid of it quick. Right? So there's a lot that goes into whether something is experienced as too much, it has to get pushed behind a wall, or whether the person can handle it and start going through the bites. It's not only how hard it hits, how bad it is, it's all these other things as well. I also want to talk about attachment a little here. That secure attachment, Erik Erikson had a different term for it. He called that the phase of trust versus mistrust. So how do you get to be securely attached? You have that good enough mother where you learn from repeated experiences that things are basically okay. Yeah, there might be some challenges, but they're not going to be overwhelming challenges. And my good enough mother, who by the way doesn't have to be your mother, but does have to be good enough, my good enough mother will help me manage it so it doesn't get to be too bad, right? That's how that trust gets formed. The modern study of trauma started out in World War I, which was the first major war after the psychology movement was born. And what they observed was as the bombs were going off in the trenches around these young men, they would be calling out for God or for their mother. What does that mean about trust and attachment? That secure attachment, that basic trust, was based on things are going to be okay. They won't get too bad. Well, you just broke your promise. Things are too bad, right? So even with people who are securely attached, trauma can disrupt that. And here are the kinds of things we might see following a traumatic event. Some children will say, maybe not in words, but in behavior, you know, you were supposed to protect me. You're my parent. You were supposed to protect me and you didn't. What good are you? I'm checking out. Or it could go the other way. When you weren't there, something bad happened. I'm staying close, right? So you can get the withdrawal or you can get the clinging. It could go either way. So even secure attachment can be disrupted by trauma. Another change that often happens is that children move from, you know that expression, oh, that's so sad, she lost her childhood, right? What do we mean? We want kids to be saying things like, can't I play now and do my homework later? No, that was my best friend last week. Get with it. This is my best friend, right? We want kids to be very kind of present focused. What happens when they discover that their parents can't protect them? When they get a trauma, often, not always, but often, they shift from that healthy present focus to a survival orientation. I have to make sure that nothing else bad happens to me because nobody else is going to do it, right? My parents failed to protect me. I'm thinking of a boy I worked with, 12, 13 years old. He'd been on the all-star team in his little league the year before. And now it's spring, I don't know, March or April. And I asked him one day, I said, so, has your team started to practice yet this year? And if so, how does it look? Oh, I'm not on a team this year. Well, why not? What are you talking about? I don't really care about baseball. Oh, I thought baseball was your life. He couldn't shake me off. Finally, he said, well, I just don't go outside anymore. So he'd shifted from that primary interest in doing what he loved to a primary focus on protecting himself from anything else happening. He just went to school and went home so he wouldn't put himself at risk of more bad things happening. Right? So I'm going to give you a list of post-traumatic stress symptom greatest hits. First, I want to tell you about a study that was done in the Boston school system by Giaconia and about 18 other authors. School system, that means it was a community sample rather than a clinical sample. Thousands of teenagers in this study. And here's what they found. They found, and I say boys and girls because this was back in the days when we thought that's all there was. It's more complicated now. But at the time, these were the results. They found that boys and girls had equal levels of exposure to trauma. Bad things happened just as much to boys as to girls. At equivalent levels of trauma exposure, girls had PTSD 6 times more than boys did. And at equivalent levels of trauma exposure, girls and boys had equivalent levels of dysfunction. So let's unpack that finding a little. You know the expression, women go to therapy, men go to court? Or more formally, we might say, girls tend to be internalizers and boys tend to be externalizers. That's really what the study found. If I'm an internalizer and something comes along that hits my sore spot and feels like this, I'm more likely to say, oh, now I'm thinking about the bad things that happened and I'm having bad feelings, right? And those symptoms look like PTSD. So I might meet criteria for that diagnosis. On the other hand, if I'm an externalizer and something comes along that hits my sore spot and feels this bad, I'm more likely to say, whoa, bad feeling, got to get rid of this quick. I know what to do. Or whatever it takes, right? And so that's going to look more like conduct disorder or substance abuse, just for example. And yet, so it's equivalent level of dysfunction, but it doesn't meet criteria as often for PTSD. So the reason I told you about that study is that I want you to understand that we're not only talking about PTSD, we're talking about just about every kind of diagnosis or presenting problem. And there is extensive research that these symptoms go across diagnoses and they're post-traumatic stress symptoms. So what do you get? Let's see, intrusion, that's when the thoughts or memories come into your mind when you wish they wouldn't. That can be pretty disturbing. You know, if you're trying to kiss your boyfriend or trying to get to sleep at night and these bad thoughts come in, wow, it can be really upsetting. Intrusion also covers nightmares and flashbacks. Those are other versions of the intrusion symptom. These symptoms are really distressing, so one of the favored strategies is avoidance. What do I have to do to keep from getting reminders that will cause those intrusions? Oh, another good reason for avoidance. What do I have to do to keep the bad thing from happening again? For example, let's say that when I biked home from school one day, I got hit by a car. Well, I could just stay home and never go outside anymore, but I'm going to use a different strategy to get my world under control and safe again. I'm going to use a cognitive distortion. That's a technical term for a superstition, actually. I know why I got hit by a car there, because the drivers on that corner, they don't look where they're going. So I bike the long way home from school now. I don't go through that corner anymore. Yeah, that's how I keep myself safe. So the avoidance is to avoid reminders and to avoid the risks. Hyperarousal, that's that jumpiness, that startle response. Hypervigilance, you stare at me? You got a problem? So I'm just messing with you, don't worry. That hypervigilance, you know, if you think you're a nail, everything looks like a hammer, right? And so if you're on the lookout for danger, a lot of things look like they could be danger, right? Now, the technical term for what I just did is hostile attribution bias. You see a neutral or ambiguous cue, you see somebody kind of happens to be looking your way, and you interpret it as a danger, right? That's in the conduct disorder literature, but it's a post-traumatic stress symptom, okay? Numbness, you've probably heard clients who've explained this strategy to you. No, I have to keep everything flat. I can't even feel the good feelings because then I'll have to feel everything. So I just keep it all down low. And this can work. Not everybody's good at that though. So different people come up with different strategies. For example, self-medication. That's a compassionate term for substance abuse. I'm thinking of one young man who told me, I got to catch a buzz every night just to get to sleep. Otherwise, I'll be thinking about what happened for hours. It doesn't always have to look bad. Matter of fact, the same person told me, when I get out of school, I do this job, and then I do that job, and then I babysit while I do my homework. Workaholism, as long as you're keeping yourself busy, that'll work. Another nice strategy could be thrill seeking. If you're focused on not getting hurt or not getting caught, that can take all your attention, which is very nice. That keeps that bad stuff behind the wall where it belongs. Another common symptom is affect dysregulation. I don't use this term with my clients. It's a technical term just for us, but it's an important term. Affect dysregulation, that's emotion out of control, right? Which is when something this bad happens and it hits a sore spot and feels like this. Well, this is too much, got to get rid of it quick. And so you often see the impulsive acting out, whether it looks like this or whatever it takes to get get things manageable again. It gets worse. I'm in a hurry today. I think I'm going to bike home from school that short way, the way I used to go before the accident. Yeah. But you know what? As I get closer to that corner, my hands are gripping the handlebars, my heart's pounding. And finally I say, no way, I'm just going to go around. Phew. Just saved my life. Every time you avoid, you saved your life again, right? And so avoidance is self-reinforcing. It keeps on teaching me that I'm still in danger and have to keep doing that, right? Or what if I see somebody looking my way, say, what, you got a problem? What are their choices here? They could say, oh no, sorry, just happened to be looking that way, didn't mean anything. So what am I saying to myself? I made them back down. You got to stay on point or they'll walk all over you. Now, those of you who work with aggressive teenagers, you know I'm not making this up, right? Or what if the person says, yeah, I got a problem, your face. Either way, what I learn is I'm still in the danger zone. I better keep my adrenaline pumping. And what we know about digesting is when you're in an emergency and your adrenaline is pumping, your body goes into sympathetic mode. Your blood goes to your arms and your legs so that you can manage your danger, and you don't get any digesting done. And that's actually a pretty good metaphor, because we know that traumatization can last indefinitely. You don't get it digested. And partly that's because you're busy with your hypervigilance. You're not out of the danger zone yet, and that's what's taking your attention. So let's say something this bad happens. I should be able to handle that. It's a little bad, but not too bad. Oh, but it hits an existing sore spot and feels like this. This is too much. I guess I'll just push that behind the wall. Study after study around the world has found, for example, in community events like hurricanes and earthquakes, that children who had been previously traumatized become much more symptomatic after the new trauma than children who had not been previously traumatized. This isn't fair, but it's true. It's how it works. People who are already wounded have a harder time handling new stressors. The more desperate I am to keep the bad thing from happening again, the wider net I might cast. I might overgeneralize. For example, wow, Uncle Matt messed with me. I don't trust him. I'm not going anywhere with him again. I want to figure out why he did that. You know, Uncle Matt has a mustache. I don't trust men with mustaches. I don't trust men. I don't trust. Here's another example of overgeneralization that we often see. Wow, I didn't know something that bad could happen. I wonder if something else bad will happen. I know something else bad will happen. As a matter of fact, only bad things will happen. And even if things are going well, it's just going to get wrecked because it's going to go bad anyway. So I'm not going to get my hopes up. And that way, when the next bad thing happens, it won't have to hurt me so much because I wasn't hopeful, right? The technical term for that is pessimistic future. Again, it's in the conduct disorder literature that it's a post-traumatic stress symptom. And finally, our clients may not get much sympathy because from the outside, it just looks like they're doing their symptoms, right? I don't know, they just lose their temper all the time. I don't know, they're just crying all the time, whatever it is, right? Because other people may not see from the outside that something happened that hit their sore spot. So the first time in this class, but far from the last time, I'm going to ask you to become upset. The reason is it's not because I'm mean. It's because we know about learning that if you just focus on theory, you learn this much. But if you can relate the theory to your personal experience, you learn this much. And you know, you're in a class, I want to make sure you learn as much as you can. So I'm going to ask you to become a little upset in order to relate the theory to your personal experience so you can learn more. But I don't want you to become too upset because that will interfere with your learning. So first of all, I want you to come up with a strategy you can use in case you need to. Something you can think about that will help you to feel good. Just in case you need to do that, I'll give you examples of what other people have come up with, just to give you some ideas. Some people have said they think about playing with their dog. Some people like to think about drinking that morning cup of coffee. Some people have like a safe place visualization they've used before and they like to use that. Some people like to think about a person that when they're with that person, they just feel good. Some people like to think about doing an activity. People have told me roller skating, splitting wood, swimming, an activity that when they do it, they're feeling good. So I want you to come up with a strategy you can use, something you can think about that will help you to feel okay so that you can use that in case you need to, in case you're finding yourself becoming more upset than you want to be right now. All right. So I want you to think about something that happened in the last day or two that bothered you, even a little. Okay. And if something came to mind and you said to yourself, nah, that's nothing, you can use that. It doesn't have to be big. Okay. So I'm going to talk you through a visualization. You can do it with your eyes opened or closed. Concentrate on the worst moment of that recent event. And on a 0 to 10 scale, SUDS, subjective units of disturbance scale, on a 0 to 10 scale where 10 is the worst the feeling could be, and 0 is no bad feeling at all. Not how bad it was at the time, but when you bring it to mind right now, how bad is the feeling right now? 10 is the worst, 0 is nothing. Write that number down. Okay. Now concentrate on that worst moment, along with what you're seeing. Notice what you're saying to yourself right now, your emotional reaction right now, where you feel it in your body. Now let your mind float back, maybe a long way back, to where you first learned to feel this way. And if something pops into your head, even if it doesn't seem to make sense, that's okay. We'll use that. And for that earlier memory that you just floated back to, not how bad it was at the time, but how it feels right now when you bring it to mind. How bad's the feeling right now on 0 to 10, where 10 is the worst and 0 is nothing? Write that number down. Now, because I asked you to do something that might have been upsetting, I'm going to ask you to do something designed to help you calm down and feel comfortable. You probably don't need it, but do it anyway. It's part of the training. I'm going to talk you through a deep breathing routine where I'm going to count to 3 slowly while you take a slow breath in. I'm going to count to 3 more while you hold your breath, and 3 more while you let it go. Okay? Breathe in, 1, 2, 3, hold it, 1, 2. Let it go, 1, 2, 3. Again, breathe in, 1, 2, 3, hold it, 1, 2. Let it go, 1, 2. One more time, breathe in, 1, 2, 3, hold it, 1, 2, 3, let it go, 1, 2, 3. Okay. So now I'm going to ask you a question. usually do this in a group so you can see the range of responses. So I'll just have to, after you answer, I'll tell you what I usually see in a group. If I would say how many in the group, you know, I asked you to do distress ratings on a recent memory and an older memory. If you had a higher distress rating for the older memory, then raise your hand. And whether you raise your hand or not, ask yourself, is it possible that some of my reaction to that recent event might have been a sore spot reaction? And then I would ask how many had a higher distress rating for the recent event. And just so you know, usually about 2/3 of a group has a higher distress rating for the older event, and about 1/3, maybe a quarter, has a higher distress rating for the recent event. Now, our clients are often much more focused on what's going on right now. They don't necessarily want to talk about the past. They want to talk about what's going on right now. It's what they're paying attention to. So I'm going to give you a case example. This is a girl I knew. She was in the 2nd grade when I was working with her. When she was about halfway through her, well, when she was in kindergarten, basically a normal kid, good kid. She, you know, she had friends. She did fine in school. She got along with people. Everything was all right. Halfway through the year, her mother died suddenly in a car accident. Everything went bad for her. She cried a lot. She got in conflicts with her friends. She even was rude to the teachers once in a while, which just wasn't her. Well, she went to a good school. They cared about her. They had her see a counselor every week. And the same thing in 1st grade. In 2nd grade, she got me. So those of you who work with 2nd graders can guess what we did in our first session. We played Candyland because we want our clients to feel comfortable with us, and that's what you do. She did become comfortable with me. And by, you know, a few meetings in, I remember one day I did my usual check-in. Tell me something good and something bad since last time we met. And the something bad she told me was, she said, you know, my teacher picks on me. She doesn't like the Haole girls. By the way, if you're not used to Hawaiian terminology, Haole is roughly equivalent to Yankee or Gringa, right? It's those white people from the mainland. So I have observed in her class, I've got 5 different kids in that class. I've observed for a couple hours. The teacher does not have a beef with Haoles. The teacher has a beef with kids who make trouble. So I'm like 110% sure that it's not really about her teacher. So what if I say to her, it's not really about your teacher, is it? It's about your mother. All you counselors want to talk about is my mother, my mother, my mother. I don't care about my mother. I'm trying to tell you my teacher picks on me. And she's right. For one thing, that's exactly what she told me. Am I stupid? Don't I get it, right? And the other reason she's right, this wall, I need this wall, right? I mean, it's there for a reason. That stuff behind the wall, that's too much. So what if the counselor keeps on saying, your mother, your mother, your mother? What's this girl going to do? Well, she's got one wall there for the mother stuff. She can just put another wall here for the counselor stuff. She knows how to protect herself, right? So that's not going to work. So what if I say, oh, your teacher picks on you? Why? What happened? Well, this local girl called me the F word, and I had to stay in from recess. Why do you have to stay in from recess? Well, because I pushed her. Oh, okay. Well, what happened to her? Nothing. The teacher didn't hear her. Oh, that's not fair. Then she thinks I get it. She thinks I'm worth talking to. And the next week she tells me something else. And the next week she tells me something else. And the next year she gets another counselor. And the next year she gets another counselor. And nobody ever solves the problem. And that is our challenge. So you go back and do the quiz now, and we'll see you in class.